Okay, so I got a really good question about adding cannons to our games. Um, so I thought we'd run through the process very quickly. Oh, straight away. Um, so we're gonna do something like this. We've got an object there that's just firing out a projectile that we have to dodge. Okay, pretty straightforward. Actually, it's not very difficult. I haven't checked. There probably are tutorials out there already about this, but I thought we would go over it. Since we have a very specific setup in our own games, I thought I would go over the process, you know, specifically with our own game setups. So how do we add a cannon? Right, how are we going to do this? We're going to take three kind of general steps. We're going to create our bullet or laser or whatever we want to use as our projectile. We're going to create it in layer 2 along with the rest of our spawning objects, the players in there and our pickups, whatever we're using for those. We're going to add a property to that object which will be used to detect the collisions. We're going to apply some rigid body physics to it and the collision bounds that we require for it to detect those collisions. We're then going to come back to layer 1 and build a quick cannon of some kind, a quick blaster, and then we're going to be using the edit object actuator to keep adding that bullet to the cannon object, the same way we've been spawning our player and our pickup, except we're going to use linear velocity to fire that bullet off on a particular axis. The next stage then is obviously to detect the collision with the player so that we can take damage. So I'm not going to go over losing life or health, we're just going to have our dudes die, I'm afraid. Photoshop and fire up Blender. So I think this is the file we're going to be using. This is our clean slate. Let's go through the process then. Very, very quickly, let's get our projectile in there. I'm going to use an icosphere. Let's scale it down a little bit. I think I'll just turn on these screencast keys. I'm not going to be doing anything particularly interesting, but you can see what keys I'm pressing down here. So we'll scale it down a little bit more. Let's add a it's so hard to grab these on a Mac. Let's add a quick material. I've got such a dark level that I'm going to go with a very light material. I'm going to turn down the specular intensity. This is something that I do just about every time I create material. This little slider here, if you look at the preview, the higher the intensity, the more shiny the object. So if you want a super shiny snooker ball, that's what you want. As a kind of matter of course, every time I create a material I turn the intensity down. I would rather have this, I prefer this kind of matte appearance to my materials, but there you go. So that's our object. What else are we going to do? We need to add our physics. The physics tab's kind of hidden in the corner here, so we're going to go with this rigid body physics type. I'm going to scroll down and tick collision bounds and choose the convex hull. That always seems to work quite well. And the next thing we're going to do is lock the translation. We're going to disable the simulation of linear motion on these axes. And I'm pretty sure that kind of stops it from getting knocked off its axis. So if we lock the translation on these, we should be good to go. Actually, one more thing, let's add that property. So this is how we've been detecting collisions with our other objects so far. So we're going to add a property called bullet and into layer 1, and let's make this cannon very quickly. So I'm just going to snap my cursor to the empty here so that when I add my mesh it'll be reasonably close to where I want it. Let's get it in the center here, lower it down on the ground plane, and then let's get into edit mode. I'll just select this face, inset it a little bit, that's maybe a bit much. Extrude out our cannon, and why not, I think I'll just extrude and cancel. Remember, if you extrude and right click, It doesn't cancel the extrusion, it just cancels the translation, the automatic translation, so still have an extrusion there. So I'll scale that up, may as well, and make this little piece on the ends, and then I'm going to go crazy, inset again, and extrude this back inside itself. So there's our cannon. I'm going to give that a material as well. When you're adding materials, if you want to keep things consistent, you have all the materials that you have created so far in this little drop down. So I'm going to apply the same material I've been using for my level, this purple here, to the cannon, and then we're going to have a look at the logic on this. So zoom in a bit. So we want to be always adding that bullet to this cannon. So the edit object actuator, link these up, choose our bullet. I didn't name the bullet, so very quickly back in here, select the bullet into the object data tab and give it a name. It's a bit easier to find in the drop down menu. It's a good habit to get into, is naming your objects. I'm obviously not in that habit yet, so select our bullet here. So this is the object that's going to be added. Here's the linear velocity I was talking about. So we want the linear velocity to be on the x-axis. This is our x-axis field here. So we want it to be firing out the x-axis, but we need it to be need it to have a negative value. This is the positive x this direction. This is our negative x coming this way. So we'll go for negative 25. Let's give that a bash, and hide that panel. Right, so over here we've got this option here, the activating true level triggering. If we switch that on, I'm not going to go into too much about what this means, but it activates this skip field here. Every 50 logic ticks, it is going to activate this sensor. So every Blender it doesn't use seconds to measure time, it uses its own logic tick system. So every 50 logic ticks it's going to activate this sensor and add that bullet. And then the other thing we've got here actually is the time field. This is the duration the new object lives or the track takes. So if we set this to 20, every 20 it's going to fire, it's going to add it, and then 20 logic ticks later it's going to vanish. So it will come out here and then disappear wherever 20 logic ticks are. So let's have a look at what that looks like. Okay, so that's probably too short a lifespan for that. It's actually a little bit too big. You can see it inside the barrel of that cannon there. So I may as well, the quickest thing to do would be to scale up the cannon a little bit, and then I'm going to increase the time that that object appears for. So let's put that up to something like 40. I may as well double it. And what did we think of the space in between? I can still see the ball, so it's lasting long enough. I think it's stretching all the way to the edge of the level before it disappears, and that's quite a good speed for it to be coming out. That's a good kind of frequency for it to actually be firing out at. We'll leave that at 50. I think I'll scale this down a little bit more so that we don't see it in the barrel of the cannon. Let's see, this is just going to be well, we haven't set up the collision yet, so let's see what happens when we do collide with it. So it's just kind of shunting us around a little bit, giving us a bit of a bump, a bit of a dunt. That's a good word. So we need to set up the collision. The collision with our player. So back to our player, and the logic bricks here are getting pretty mental. So let's minimize a couple here. So we need to add a collision sensor. So collision sensor, and it's colliding with that bullet property that we added to the bullet, and we're going to be pretty harsh, and we're just going to end this object's life. So we want to end bullet. We want to add it, we want to end it. So if it collides with, if our player collides with anything that has that bullet property on it, it's going to end its its life. If you wanted to look into how you could change a health bar every time it collides, or if you add a lives property, you could start off with 3 lives, and every time you collide, subtract 1 from that life property. That might be quite a nice addition, but I'm going to leave it at that. So let's, it's so hard to grab these. Let's have a look at that. Back in layer 1, so let's see. Let's try that again. There we go. Collide with a bullet and we disappear. So that seems to be working fine. So pretty straightforward. What I would like you to think about is, how you could adapt this, make this more specific to your game. Perhaps you could look into animating this cannon so that it rotates round, or think about your own game. What about if it was firing straight up, or if it was firing straight down? Think about your levels and what would be the most appropriate setup if this is the kind of thing you wanted to go for. So I hope that helps. As usual, obviously if you've got any trouble with this, give me a shout. Thank you very much.